Hey guys, Tony here, and back to do another edition of my vinyl collection must-have series. I do these, every once in a great while when I'm really inspired, I guess, by an album that I could kind of talk a little bit at length about. I mean, I hope to do more of these eventually. Many of my videos, of course, are new finds, and it's hard to really speak at length about any one album. Mostly because chances are I'm not that acquainted with the record yet. But yeah, every once in a while it's fun to talk about one specific record. And as I mentioned in my last video, I've been on a big Rolling Stones kick. The Stones have pretty much always been a favorite band of mine. I mean, to me, they're up there with, the Beatles and Dylan and Neil Young. They're just part of that core bands that that really got me into music, and I'll always love. And the reasoning, as I said, for my just renewed kind of interest in the Stones again. I mean, I played them to death a long time ago. I mean, but the reason for it is reading Keith Richards' book Life, and it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend this. It's a big book, but as I said, I got it for Christmas. I picked it up, read a little bit of it, and for some reason, I don't know, I put it down. And just recently, I picked it up again and ripped through it. It was just that good. I really enjoyed it. I was actually kind of sad when I was done with it. You know, some books are like that. You finish and you're like, nah. But anyway, I highly recommend this if you like the Stones. It's really well written, and for the most part, it's just Keith telling stories. So anyway, I'm going to talk about the album Sticky Fingers. As I mentioned in my last video, I tried doing this before and wasn't too happy with the result. Hopefully this will be better. Classic album. One of my favorites. As I said too, I mean, I always say Let It Bleed is my favorite. But that's hard to say. I mean, they've got, during this period, they have so many great records. And so this is one of them. As I said, everybody says Exile. I really love Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, Beggar's Banquet, Goat's Head Soup. I mean, just a killer period for the Stones. But yeah, this is the Rolling Stones' ninth studio album, and it was released in 1971. It was basically recorded. They started recording it essentially in 1969. They recorded at Muscle Shoals in Alabama, basically on tour, their infamous 1969 tour. I believe it was their first tour in years, and so while on tour, the tour was basically done, I believe. So they said, the band's hot, let's get in the studio and record a few songs. So they ended up at Muscle Shoals in Alabama, and they recorded like 3 tunes. They recorded not Sister Morphine. They recorded Brown Sugar, and they recorded Wild Horses, and they recorded another one there as well. And right after that, they went on to play at the infamous Altamont Speedway concert, where, as we all know, I mean, there was a murder. It was just a violent scene. So yeah, in the book, Keith talks about how, in the studio at Muscle Shoals, it was like bliss. It was the greatest thing. And they went from that right to Altamont, where it was just totally ridiculous. So yes, so that was in 1969. Then in 1970, they went into Olympic Studios, which I believe is in London, and they essentially recorded the rest of this album. Sister Morphine was recorded during the Let It Bleed sessions, but ended up on Sticky Fingers. This is also the first album that does not feature Brian Jones in any capacity. It's the first album with Mick Taylor in it. Mick Taylor, of course, he was in John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and he was Brian Jones' replacement. Brian Jones was just kind of, the story is, of course, that he was just too out of it, he got too big of a head, I guess, and was too messed up on drugs. So essentially is the story, and they fired him, and Mick Taylor was his replacement. Killer album. It's fantastic. As I said, this is an original. It has the zipper. You weren't supposed to be able to open this, but everybody ripped it and opened it. And you can see, that's what's underneath. The concept of the cover was designed by Andy Warhol, although he wasn't the actual artist. He wasn't the photographer who took this photograph. Um, and as I showed too, I have this reissue, which I'm really happy to get. The box is, just kind of lame with the T-shirt. Um, but, I'm still happy to have a nice, clean copy of this album. I mean, classics. Every song on here is basically a classic song. Um, and you have a killer lineup of guest musicians that played on this record as well. So, for side one, of course, it opens with Brown Sugar. And, I really got to give props to Mick Jagger. He wrote many of the songs almost on his own on this album. Of course, it was, Keith Richards had a hand in many of the songs too. Usually, it was Keith who'd come up with the original concept. He'd come up with the first couple words and in the riff, and Mick Jagger would take it from there. But a lot of these Mick wrote on his own. Brown Sugar, I think, was a combination of the two. Sway was, I think, almost Mick Jagger completely. Wild Horses was almost completely written by Mick, but I believe Keith came up with the riff for the tune. And that song is basically about Marianne Faithfull, who I believe she had a really bad drug problem at that time, and I believe she almost OD'd. And the story is that Mick was at her bedside in the hospital after an OD, and the line "Wild Horses," could never drag me away, came from that. Can't You Hear Me Knocking? I mean, talk about a classic Stones album. Just a song, just a fantastic song. You Gotta Move, which is a cover, awesome as well. And on the second side, you have Bitch, which is another Mick Jagger, almost all the way. Sister Morphine, of course, is, drugs were heavily involved in, especially in Keith Richards' life. Um, and here's that tune, by the way, Sister Morphine. Excellent song, Sister Morphine, Sweet Cousin Cocaine, and then you have Dead Flowers, which is probably one of my all-time favorite Stones songs. Love that song. On Beggar's Banquet, even a little bit on Let It Bleed and on Sticky Fingers, there begins this little bit of a folk country kind of feel to a few of the songs. Um, and that could basically be attributed to Graham Parsons, of course, who is of solo fame, but also in the Byrds, the Flying Burrito Brothers, the International Submarine Band. Um, he really was the first outlaw country guy. He basically set the blueprint for people like Merle Haggard and Willie Nelson to do that. He blended country and rock in a way where they were just indistinguishable. That's what's always said about Graham Parsons, and of course he died young. Well, he was a really close friend of Keith Richards, and he reintroduced a lot of the country stuff to Keith, and that's where the influence comes in. But yeah, Dead Flowers is just such a great song. Love that one. Moonlight Mile, too, almost completely written by Mick Jagger. It was a really prolific period for Mick Jagger during this time, and that, again, is another favorite Stone song of mine. It's so good. Again, if you don't have this album, I highly recommend you get it, check it out. As I say in this series, this is for me like albums that must be in my collection. I mean, to try and tell another person what should be in their collection, obviously, that's not really what I'm trying to do. But hopefully, I could turn somebody on to an album that they never really checked out. And most of these are really common records, as Let It Bleed is. I mean, but yeah, you have a great list of people that guest on this album. You had Ry Cooder, however you say his name. Jim Dickinson. Jim Dickinson was around at Muscle Shoals, and he played piano on Wild Horses. Ian Stewart, who was the Stones' co-founder and guy behind the scenes who played the piano, he was kept out of the limelight because he didn't look like the rest of the Stones. He didn't want to play that on Wild Horses, so Jim Dickinson stepped up and played it. Yeah, he's an interesting guy too. He played on a number of different albums, but I think he was mostly a session guy. He just happened to know that the Stones were going to be at Muscle Shoals, and he showed up there. They tried to keep it really hush hush. He also produced Third by Big Star, so it's the same Jim Dickinson. He also worked with Sonic Boom of Spaceman 3. So an interesting guy. He's no longer with us, and also Nicky Hopkins, of course, plays on it, um, and Ian Stewart, Jack Nietzsche plays on it. Um, Also, mix his name's gonna escape me. Bobby Keys, the saxophone player, he plays on this as well. And yeah, it's an excellent album. I highly recommend it, of course. I'm sure many of you have it or are familiar with this record, but if not, it's definitely worth looking into. I love the Stones. They are and will always be one of my favorite bands. And again, I highly recommend reading this. Excellent book. I loved it. I mean, I think Grease and Thunder left me a comment, and it's like, how's it feel to have Keith Richards in your head? And it's true. Like, when you read a book, you get into it, and it's fantastic. It's a great book. So there you go, guys. I hope this was informative, and maybe you learned something. And hopefully I inspired you to check out this album if you're not a fan of it or know of it. So thanks for watching. Please leave comments. Thank you.